in the room. We may have but this is a recreation of Czechoslovak cooperation. We have a state secretary from the Czech Republic or Czechia, Jan Havranek or Honza Havranek. I don't know how informal is that. And we have Marian Mayer, a deputy defense minister from Slovakia. Remotely, we have Jan Olof Lind, who is the deputy defense minister of Sweden. And we have a representative of industry, Frank Haun, who is the CEO of the KNDS, one of the major defense companies who we cooperate very closely with. Now, let me just remind you, before we go into the panel, that you have the audience online, that you can ask your questions, and you are very much asked to do so. So use your app, the GLOBSEC app, ask your question, and the questions will appear here, and we will be picking up. You can also vote for questions. I think you've been already told that in the morning. Now, this session will have to cannot last beyond 60 minutes because we have another session coming up here 5 minutes later with the Prime Minister of Slovakia, Chancellor of Austria, and the Deputy Prime Minister of Czechia. So we will have to finish right on time. So European Defence Cooperation. You've seen the outline of the panel. Let me just say that I think there are really three predominant questions that we will be going around, I believe. Number one, it is the issue of the relationship between the European Union and the instruments of European Union's defense cooperation and NATO. Through these instruments, I mean PESCO, European Defence Fund. So in the past, that relationship was on occasion difficult. Is it still going to be? Is it still difficult? How we can resolve these issues? Number two, there is a question about the procurement. All of us, I think, heard a lot of the frustration here about the slowness of the procurement process. Do we have a way around that? Will the procurement process remain dynamic in the future? And will the instruments of European Defence Cooperation, such as the European Defence Fund and European Defence Agency, will they help out with this process? And finally, we have the question about we have the issue really about the future of European defence industry. Are we capable of creating truly pan-European defense industry, capable of competing with the American and our defense industries on the global stage? And if we are, what is the role of the smaller member states in it? Will the industries in the smaller member states, will they just fold and become disappear, or will they become a part of a larger defense project? Now, so I think these are the key issues here, but I will have some targeted questions for our speakers, and as I ask them my questions myself, and please think about yours, and you can raise your hand, and we can just do that here in the room, or you can just use the app, whichever way you prefer. So starting up with Jan Havranek, I think that I would like to start from yourself, and I will move to Marian. Jan, you've been working in close cooperation with NATO for many, many years. You also have the national experience and you have the EU experience. So you've been witnessing firsthand the issues and problems which may appear in the relationship between European Union and NATO. In the last few years, we have created the permanent structured cooperation, European Defence Fund. Has it helped out, or is it making cooperation with NATO more difficult?
Thank you, Marcin, and good afternoon to the audience here. I'm a bit perplexed because this is the first event since 16 months, actually, that I'm attending live with such an audience, so it's a true privilege to be here. Now, to your question, European defense cooperation, for me, is the key building block of transatlantic security and defense cooperation. For many years, the United States have asked the Europeans to do more in terms of developing capabilities, contributing more to operations. And so it is only natural that we Europeans, as a part of the European Union, but also in other formats, we have organized ourselves and created tools and instruments to contribute with specific capabilities to the wider transatlantic security architecture. So from my perspective, PESCO or other instruments should not be making the transatlantic cooperation more difficult. But I also have to say that we Europeans or members of the European Union who are also members of NATO have a special task to explain to those who are not members of these organizations what it takes to be involved in these structures and in these initiatives. And it really is an internal Stratcom effort that we need to ensure the transparency. Just by saying that these processes are mutually complementary and transparent, we don't make that transparency happen. So we have a special task in that respect. And I should also say that on the staff-to-staff level, already today, the cooperation is excellent. I mean, it has reached its maximum potential. So there's always a need for more political push. If we want to see more complementarity and more output, it's really up to the politicians.
Thank you, Jan. And if you think about some follow-up questions, do let me know, either through the app or, just think about it right now. And then we will come to the round of questions. Now, Marian, I wanted to ask you specifically about Slovakia. Well, Slovakia is this very interesting case of a country which used to be a laggard with respect to defense spending, but it is no longer the case. In the last few years, Slovakia has ramped up its defense spending, so it's now at the level of close to 2% of GDP, which is almost meeting the NATO recommendation. But there is this nagging question whether this hike in defense spending is not related to this single purchase of F-16. And will this continue in the years to come? And kind of a loosely related question to that. When you look into the European Defence Fund and you think about the future of Slovak defense industry, do you think the Slovak defense industry will benefit from the European Defence Fund, or is European Defence Fund more likely to serve bigger industries and bigger member states?
Yes, you're right. We wish F-16s could be cheaper, but this is not the reality. But seriously, we are paying a lot for this project, as it is the biggest project in the history of Slovak modernization. But at the same time, it's not the only project. But what's worrisome is it's not to find the projects which are needed, because there is a big gap of modernization from the past in the Slovak case. What is much harder is first to make stability of the defense budget, because yes, it's nice to see 2% of GDP, but still there's discussion going on and good ideas from different people, whether we don't need to, or whether we need to pay so much for the defense, and this securing defense budget is still ongoing process. That's first. And second, how to spend the money once you have it, how to spend it in a proper and effective manner. This is problem of procurement law. This is problem of very complicated processes, especially inside of the European Union. And this is something we should we should work on, because otherwise we will not be competitive to the countries like China or like Russia, but also compared to, for example, United States, it's much harder to acquire anything in European Union, not only on national level and not even speaking on some kind of international multilateral cooperation. When it comes to EDF, this could be very helpful, and we see it as a good tool and something which is very promising for the future. But at the same time, it needs to be taken from all European countries as European tool. So we need to be sure, and you're coming from Poland, and you know that very well. But it's not only about Poland. It's also visible here that we need to be sure that it's not helping only the big ones. It's helping to the smaller ones, including smaller defense entities all over Central Europe, for example. So this is what still needs to be discussed, how to manage. But at the same time, we need competitive projects from these countries, from companies. So the companies needs to be active, and governments needs to help them.
Thank you, Marian. Now let me turn to our remote to the speakers with whom we are connected remotely. I would like to turn to Jan Olof Lind, who is the State Secretary from the Swedish Ministry of Defense. Welcome, sir. And let me just say that we are delighted to have you here with us. Sweden is a country which has a very large industrial history and which has very developed defense industry. Would you agree with the statement that Europeans are capable of creating a major pan-European defense industries which can freely successfully compete on the global stage?
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to this conference. I'm sorry I couldn't be on site with my colleagues on this panel, but I'm impressed how we could organize this. Well, this is a very important question. As you mentioned, we have a fairly large industrial base still in Sweden. And I think what we did a number of years ago was to make it very competitive, because we couldn't be the only one offering them orders. So they had to be very competitive on the international arena. This work started like some 25 years ago. The other thing that I would like to mention is that last December we passed a defense bill in our parliament, which meant that we increased our military spending by the largest amount since the 1960s. So very much of the budget goes to the orders for defense materials, science and technology, but also to build up our national defense capabilities, both on the military side and on the civilian side. I think when it comes to a European perspective, I think there are some key issues, and I think that my colleagues already mentioned them, that the one does not exclude the other. We at the same time as we build up our European capabilities, defense industrial base, we can't exclude the transatlantic link from that. We have to, the one does not exclude the other, as I said, and I think that's for many different reasons, because we need the capabilities not only produced in Europe but also from the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. I think there are many initiatives right now that we could benefit from. EDF is one of them. It's a fairly new initiative. I think we have to learn from it. We have some good experience from the past, given my background within science and technology, that we were used to a very competitive environment when it came to funding from the European Commission. But I think at the same time, it's so important to keep the member states and their will to acquire perhaps different systems. It's not to look into a system with a single source industry that could provide everybody with the same product or system. I think competition is so vital in these days, because that will drive us into new systems, new innovation that is so much needed. So I think for us, it's to deal with our industrial base, to promote it. And I know we have such good cooperation, both with the Slovak Republic and the Czech Republic, but also with Poland and other nations. And I think that's the key for us to be able to develop together the systems we need for the future. I think I stop there for the moment.
Thank you. It's a really interesting perspective also from Sweden, which I understand is involved in industrial cooperation, especially with Czechia. So let me just turn to the representative of industry, because we've been speaking so far with the representatives of national administrations, but let's look into the other side of the coin here. Mr. Frank Haun, I would like to ask about your perception of these new European instruments, European Defence Fund and the older one, European Defence Agencies. Do you find the operation, the existence helpful to the industry and actually meeting the needs of the industry?
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation to this panel, while I'm the industrial exotic on this panel. I think all these European initiatives are heading into the right direction, while I think we are much too slow, and we don't use the real firepower of the industry, not in the right manner. We have a lack of innovation, and if I look into the landscape and see so many different systems throughout Europe, that doesn't make sense for me. And if you go to theater, we all go jointly out of the EU or NATO into these missions, and everybody is wearing their own boots, their own pistols, their own weapon systems, their own ammunition. And I think it is hard to be competitive against the rest of the world if we stick to so many different systems we have in use. And if you compare Europe with the US or with Russia or China, I think we are pretty much far behind. And if I go to the land system, seeing average age of main battle tanks throughout Europe, 40 years, less than 50% have been developed and manufactured in Europe. And if I go to the heavy artillery, it's only 12% of the systems have been developed and manufactured in Europe. I think there is a lot of room to improve for all of us, to be at least competitive. And I think as long as we don't get the right push from the member states, we will not change the game. And if it takes, for instance, 30 years to develop new systems, if I go for the new fighter, for the FCAS, which will be there 2040, that's in 20 years from now, IMGCS 2035, and go into the history of fighters, of transport aircraft, it doesn't make sense that we spend 2-3 decades to generate something new. I think we don't have the right setup these days. We are too egoistic in every nation, and we have to look for more joint than more buy whatever is available wherever it comes from. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So we heard three national perspectives from Slovakia, from Czechia, from Sweden. We have also heard the perspective from industry. So the floor is now available for yourself for your questions. Is it something you would like to hear further from our two representatives here on the stage and the people with whom we also connect remotely? Feel free to ask a question. And I don't see takers at this point in time, so let me ask everybody the question, and that gives you time to prepare your questions. We've seen the latest Pentagon proposal for the defense budget, which kind of deprioritizes traditional procurement and emphasizes research and development. Do you see a reflection of that in your national budgets? Do you see a reflection of that in industry's plans? Are you considering the application of the development of research and development in new technologies, further investment in the issues of artificial intelligence, sonic weapons, microelectronics? Perhaps the first person I would like to ask about it is our representatives from industry. Mr. Han.
I think I said it already. I miss the firepower. I miss the speed. We are so slow, and I don't see that these initiatives really plays a role as a game changer. I don't see this game changing. Well, I see more or less two big programs, but they are not based on NATO or an EU. This is a German-French initiative on prepping for new technologies. And I think, again, we are too slow. Technologies are changing, I would say, sometimes in some areas every year, and we are shooting for new weapon systems in 20 years. That doesn't match.
Thank you, sir. Now, let me ask Mr. Lind, how about Sweden? Is Sweden redefining its defense procurement priorities in the line similar to that of the Pentagon, or this is not happening yet?
Well, I think it's when you look upon research and technology and science and technology, I think there are different reasons, because there is a strong push for that in Sweden. One being that you have to invest in R&D in order to be a competent buyer, and that's what the industry is asking for. We are the ones that will set up the requirements for what the systems we need in the future, and that has to be based among other things on heavy investment in R&D. I think the help we could have is to have come together, for example, within the framework of the EDF, in order to push for more investment in R&D, because that will help us in the future to speed up, if you will, as Frank, if I may call you that, mentioned in his intervention, the whole process. But then again, I think we have to realize that defense markets is not a perfect market. But we do, I think the EU has done a great deal of making it more competitive. And I think, I don't know whether we ever will reach the stage where the defense market will become a perfect market like other markets. But I think there are many things that are done in that context. And for us, it has been so important to have a competitive industry in a, for example, European perspective. And I think when the government spends money on R&D, it's a different thing when industry spends money on R&D, and we have to go and look into and I'm not aiming for that right now, into the different TRL levels, because there is a difference where government is spending its money on R&D and where the industry is spending. What is important is to come together to see that we have a complete system for that. So yes, in a sense, we are going in that direction as well.
Okay, thank you. I don't know whether you gentlemen would like to volunteer some response of this question or not necessarily.
I can touch upon this this question of R&D. One of the commitments of PESCO is to spend more, to spend 2% of not GDP, but 2% of the defense budgets for research and development. And for example, in case of Slovakia, it's about, I don't know, 10 times less. So to get there is a really big challenge for us. But it's also another problem that we are increasing the budget devoted for research, but we need to have partners on the other side. We need to have the projects which we can support. This is sometimes problem. At the same time, I very much agree with Mr. Hahn, who is saying that the whole processes are very slow. Because once you can invest to the research or to the development of some product, but once you see that putting or placing the product on the market takes, I don't know, 10 years, then the appetite for investing to this project or to this product is decreasing. So it's interconnection of the will and the money which is ready, but at the same time it's about the whole cycle of defense production. And sometimes I feel that in case of European Union we are creating all obstacles for ourselves. We are not helping and not boosting to the defense industry, but we are sometimes creating, or not sometimes, but very often we are creating obstacles how to make it more complicated for ourselves. So this is where we need to work very much. And as I said at the very beginning, otherwise we will not be competitive, and this is what can make it troubles for us.
Thank you, Jan.
I mean, I agree with Marian, but we have to realize there's a paradigm shift happening, and that we need to broaden the definition of the defense market, or the defense industry does not only equal defense market. I mean, traditionally, the governments would throw money into research, and there would be spin-offs for the civilian use. Today, we're seeing startups that produce technologies that actually impact the way we organize ourselves and the way, the capabilities that get employed. So I'd say we need to broaden that definition, and we need to have a genuine dialogue, public-private partnership when it comes to innovation. But I agree, we need to increase the spending on R&T or R&D. In our case, it's 0.5% of the 2% guideline, a different 2% guideline. And certainly this is an area where standards help. The European Defence Agency serves as a good platform to organize both the companies and the member states of the EU, but there are also new and good tools emerging at the NATO level, where research and innovation has been parked and invisible to the member states for many years. So that is now changing, and agree, we need to cooperate more, but with that broadened perspective and a new definition.
Thank you, Jan, and thank you, Marian. Now, I've seen that we have a question from the audience, Matthew Rhodes, the Marshall Center, not German Marshall Fund, but Marshall Center. I'm always getting confused with.
All right. Thank you, Marcin, and hello, Jan Havranek and Marian Meyer. Since at least the 1990s, there's always been discussions about whether there can be joint procurement or other defense cooperation bilaterally between the Czech Republic and Slovakia, or at a regional level through the V4 or other frameworks. How do you see the prospects for this type of defense cooperation going forward?
Maybe I'll start with this.
It's a very targeted question.
I'm a big fan, or I used to be a big fan of joint procurement, but until I took the position of deputy minister, I'm seeing the things more realistic, I would say. I think it's very difficult to synchronize. There is a political will, but it's very difficult to synchronize the needs, the budget, the money, some requests coming from the armed forces, because although we've got very much in common, sometimes it's not so much in common. So it means that the Czech soldier is asking something else than the Slovak soldier, and sometimes making the process more complicated. But it doesn't mean that we need to resign on these. I'm just saying that we need to be more realistic. There were big projects or big ideas of the project in the past, and we didn't succeed with them, like procurement of 3D radars maybe 10 years ago or 12 years ago. And after next decade, we decided to go on our own way, although very similar one. But there are some projects like, for example, in the V4, procurement of ammunition. Hopefully, we'll get to some real outcomes. So I think coming from bottom up is the better solution in this case, and it's still about good communication on the bilateral or multilateral level. And I think with the Czech Republic we are able to discuss very openly, but also with other countries in the region. But to have the expectation that we are going to procure, for example, tracked vehicles. Now we are in the same process or similar process. We both need tracked vehicles as a part of fulfilling commitment to NATO, but we were not able to come up with the joint solution because of many different factors. So sometimes we need to be realistic and maybe not to create like too big expectations.
Thanks for this realistic assessment. And thank you, Matt, for being a persistent fan of Visegrad Defense Cooperation. To be honest, we haven't cracked fully the formula. We've been trying at this forum in all sorts of formats. And in addition to the conditions that Marian mentioned, I'd also say we need to be able to align our strategic priorities and strategic cultures. And one of the lessons learned from the past 6 or 7 years is that the Visegrad Defense Cooperation format has not been able to adjust to the changing environment and changing strategic priorities within NATO and EU. We sort of got stuck in the smart defense era of 10 to 12 years ago, when we thought that we can just, do less do more for less money, and that we can harmonize our acquisition plans and miracle will happen. It has not happened, and we are still working together to find the best and realistic projects. And it doesn't have to be about procurement. I think we've aligned ourselves in terms of training. The Visegrad Battle Group has served as a useful tool for interoperability and training and exercising and standardization. But we can also look at the requirements by NATO and see whether Visegrad Group can provide some training capacities, be it pilots, all sorts of, and we can also join our forces in out of area operations or deployments abroad. So I'd say, like Marian, bear with us. We're still working on it. I think we're much more realistic than we were 10 years ago. We still haven't cracked the code, and it requires both political will, bureaucratic persistence, and perhaps also the military attention. So, to be continued. Thank you.
But I understand if there is a will there.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we would not be sitting.
Exactly. That's showing a lot. Let me move to some questions that we got on the app. We have a question here from Heidi Maurer, which you can read. European countries tried for decades unsuccessfully to collaborate in defense. What is, in your view, the main success ingredient? Why it will work now? Let me take this question straight to the representative of industry, Frank Haun. And then perhaps also like to ask Jan Olof Lind for your views on this question.
I got already a lot of nice hints, obstacles, defense market standards, and synchronizing of needs. First of all, I have to say the defense market is not a European market so far. We still have the, the situation that nations are asking for offset requirements, co-production requirements, and it's not an open market, it's still a closed market. Pretty often you are confronted with national eyes only. So the defense market is regulated and industry cannot crack that wall. The governments could crack it. The governments have to design to make cooperation between the nations much smoother and end up with more similar products. Please, we need a framework at least within Europe to allow corporations, open corporations, not closed corporations, and to exchange technologies. Even that's an obstacle, whether it's in the north or south or east or west. Technology exchange is still hardly regulated, and I don't like to talk about export regulations. They are totally different as well. As long as we don't design a real European defense market, my best guess is we end up in a city of nowhere, and we are, again, through these obstacles, much too slow. There is no real European defense market.
Thank you. And Jan Olaf Lind, would you like to say a few words on this issue? Why, whether we really have overcome the obstacles and whether the success is likely to happen?
Well, thank you very much. First of all, could I offer a small comment on the previous question that when I look upon it from a Nordic perspective, it's not so easy always to cooperate between our Nordic neighbors, with our Nordic neighbors. So I think that has to do with a number of questions, even though we have a very strong framework agreement, the NORDEFCO agreement, but I think one has to take into account the background, security of supply, the security policy of different nations, for example, in the Nordic countries. So I think that's a question that is on the table all the time, and I think the progress is being made as well. Well, I think we've been pretty successful given where we came from. And I think, Mr. Hahn, you know the Swedish industrial base very well, and you know what we are doing. I think that's a pretty strong case for creating a very competitive industry. And I think what we have to take, and I fully share your view that it's not only about the European market, it's about the global market as well. So I think we are making progress. The governments, they most certainly have a stake in this. But I also think the industry itself has a stake in this as well, to create necessary collaborative arrangements between different industries in order to support a more competitive industrial market. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I don't know whether you gentlemen, there's no need to respond to all the questions here because we have more questions, asked. And the next one is from Nenad Knežević. Let me read it out. Given that the money is already being set aside for NATO, will the new spending in PESCO overload the budgets of the countries? So basically here, the question is whether we do have a duplication already happening in terms of resources. And Jan, let me direct this question to you.
Well, I disagree with that definition of setting money aside for NATO. Every dollar, every euro spent either nationally or within international cooperation projects is accounted for both NATO defense spending, and when spent on specific capabilities, that money stays very often in your own national system, so to say. So there is no setting aside of money. There is no membership fee to be paid for NATO, and in the similar way, there is no membership fee to be paid for PESCO projects. The money gets spent for specific capabilities on specific procurement projects or on specific operations. What is important is that whether these capabilities are developed under PESCO projects or NATO cooperation, they need to be available. They need to be available when member states of these organizations decide to use those capabilities and deploy those for the benefit of NATO collective defense, of course. And it's also important that third countries or non-member states of the European Union, non-member states of get access to PESCO projects, and we've seen a success with the military mobility project, having our North American allies and Norway joining that project, which bears a significant political symbolism. So let's move aside from the division of that resources. After all member states of NATO and EU should be operating on single set of forces, and therefore the non-duplicity is embedded in the definition.
So basically, you disagree with the premise of the question, right?
I disagree. Yeah.
Thank you. Marian, would you like to add something to that?
I completely agree with Jan. It's not either or question, investing investing into these initiatives. So for us, we need to, for example, for Slovakia, speaking on behalf of Slovakia, we are repeating everywhere on the European level as well that cornerstone of our security is NATO. I think it's the same for Czech Republic and for Poland, but it doesn't mean that we are not ready to invest financially or in any other way into initiatives on the European level, but because investing into European defense initiatives means investing into NATO's capabilities. So it's very easy, and we just need to make sure that we don't duplicate activities and strategic review processes which are now going on. Preparation of strategic compass and at the same time preparation of strategic concept, which will be prepared very soon, are good frameworks for excluding these duplicities and making sure how the things should be. So I think I also disagree with that notion of that question.
Thank you. Now let me move to the next question, which is being asked anonymously, and it's referring to yesterday's decision of NATO to create a defense innovation accelerator and NATO Innovation Fund. How do you think this is relating to the EU Defense Fund and the European Defense Agency? I hope you can see the question. If not, let me just repeat it. Yesterday, NATO agreed to create a defense innovation accelerator and a NATO Innovation Fund. How do panelists see that relating to the EU Defense Fund and the European Defense Agency? I will ask our two speakers here in the audience in a moment, but let me just start maybe with again with a representative of industry, Frank Haun from KNDS. If you have comment to offer on that.
I think this is another pretty good initiative, but I stick to what I said. If governments don't create the right framework, what is the value?
Okay, I understand. Thank you. Well, Sweden is not a NATO member, so I'm not quite sure that Jan or Olaf Lind would like to, say anything on this matter. But if you do let us know. In the meantime, let me just pass floor to Marian and Jan.
I think this is in line what we just said. For me, like debate about NATO and EU to be the same organizations is nonsense. To expect that both organizations will do the same and the outcome will be the same is just out of reality. So I mean that NATO has its own processes. Yesterday, the Agenda 2030, focusing on innovations and focusing on adjusting to the new security environment, to new technologies have been presented, and this goes in line with that. So it means, of course, there are countries which are both in NATO and EU, but there are also countries like United States, like Turkey, like Norway, which are out of the European Union, who are big investors, who are big producers, and investing a lot into research. So it means that I don't see this as contradictory. I see it as complementary, and if, of course, it's the way how the national states, national members, how they manage the whole situation and the whole initiatives. So I think that it could be, once it will be done in the proper way, it could be very helpful for both organizations and for all member states.
Thank you, Hansa.
For many years, NATO has been seen as the golden standard for military standardization, and by creating these new instruments, it's just recognizing that NATO will continue to be that golden standard, and it needs to be seen as another tool to foster innovation, to help the allies identify and generate new technologies and transfer them into NATO's tasks and core missions. And European Defence Fund, on the other hand, is a financial mechanism. Common European funding, funded by common European budget, to help the European members to close certain capability gaps identified as a part of CSDP ambition, but again, very much complementary to NATO's mission in at least the Czech and, if I may say, also Slovak view. And as Marian said, what we need, and it's a task for all of us, we need to avoid the institutional decoupling between NATO and the European Union. The worst could happen is a competition between the strategic concept on the one hand and strategic compass on the other hand. And it may be automatic to many of us here in the audience, but as I said in the beginning, we have a huge task, internal strategic communications, ensuring that transparency and mutual understanding about what it is that we're trying to do under these two very important processes.
Excellent, thank you, and also very reassuring. Let me now turn to a question of our Norwegian colleague Asle Toje. It's a strong question, which is what we can expect from Asle. With the NATO pivot to Asia, will this create new room for Europe-only defense procurement? Europe-only defense procurement. I'm assuming that Asle means Europe, not EU, given where he's from. So let me just take it straight to Frank Haun. Sir, can you offer your thoughts on whether that would be a good idea to have a Europe-only defense procurement?
I'm pretty sure if I look in the capabilities of Europe as of today, I think this will create new room for Europe or for NATO. I do not mix that up. It's Europe or NATO finally, but I think the capabilities taken as of today, I don't think that Europe is in the right shape these days.
Thank you. So you think that that's unrealistic at this point in time? Okay, thank you. Mr. Lind, do you also think this is unrealistic, or this is, the kind of a long-term goal that Europeans might want to have? Maybe not really speak about it openly at the conference, but yeah.
Well, I don't know if I should comment on NATO initiatives and pivots here, but I think it's for us it's a global market that is absolutely key for us to have in mind. The European competence and the industrial base will absolutely be key, but to create a European fortress is not what we are looking for in the future. I think it's so important that we should not compare with the US because that's a completely different market and supply chain, but they are so important for us to have in our European minds when we try to create the most effective market for us and supply chain. I think we have to take into account what happens in Asia as well, and very carefully follow that to see how we have to relate to that in the future.
Thank you. Yes, Hansa.
Can I just add that first of all, it's a bit far-fetched to say that NATO is pivoting to Asia. If you read yesterday's communique adopted by the heads of state and government at the Brussels summit, you will see that NATO is still a very Euro-Atlantic organization in its very nature. It has just broadened its perspective, and it now includes challenges and issues, including Chinese behavior in its wider perspective and how it sees the development of the security and defense landscape, including threats and challenges. And having said that, it still doesn't take the responsibility from its member states to build its own defenses and to be preparing for collective defense and to cooperate in crisis management operations. On the contrary, it requires us to do more and to take into account all different security developments, including in the Indo-Pacific region, but also in other domains. So I'm finding it difficult to connect the widening strategic perspective to the mechanisms of European procurement, if I can be honest.
I understand, but overall, you don't think it would be a great idea to have a European procurement only?
I don't understand the question, really, that part of the question.
Right. Okay. Let me just turn now to the question of Justin Lane. The question here is quite perhaps technical, but very interesting. How concerned should the region be, meaning I assume Central Europe, with the increased brain drain of potential intelligence analysts and artificial intelligence development talent moving overseas to regional defense? Well, let me take this one to Marian.
This is not a problem only for the defense sector. It's a problem of many other sectors, and this is something which is a big challenge for countries of the region to create good environment, appropriate environment with good financial conditions and everything. What's connected with conditions for the work. So of course it's not easy to keep these talented people here. Our government is focusing also on this issue, trying to invest into the education, into some other mechanisms that could be helpful to keep the people here. But of course it's a matter of market. Once there's more attraction from outside, it's very difficult to keep the people here. Our goal is to produce the new generation, I would say, of professionals, because this is something, new technologies, new initiatives, new kind of stuff which is related to defense of the future. This is something completely new, and we need the new generation of the people who from the very beginning could be somehow more stick to these national, regional industries and frameworks. So very difficult question. Very difficult question because it's not the question for one country only or for one region only. It's a very global, I would say, problem, and it's not only related, as I said, to defense sector, although it could have, in this case, it could have some security consequences.
Well, maybe I just like ask a quick follow-up to Frank Haun. If you see this kind of a problem with acquiring talent in Europe altogether and best talents migrating away from Europe to the United States or even China?
I have no fear about China. I have fear about the US, but I think Europe is such a nice area. Lots of people want to live in. We are such a nice area, and we have to fight for the talents, yes. And I'm pretty sure that if we don't like to lose them, we will not lose them, and we will create always an environment where they feel comfortable with. My biggest concern is not the brain drain. My biggest concern, and I stick to it, is the framework given to the industry.
Okay, thank you. We are running short of time, but I would like to ask still one question from the list that we have here from the audience. How do you evaluate threats related to intellectual property being acquired by companies linked to the states like China, especially within critical infrastructure? Well, with that, again, perhaps I will start from Frank Haun, and then perhaps we will turn to the audience, to our two panelists here.
That's a real big threat, and we all within the defense industry have been attacked. And we know how complicated it is to protect ourselves against these threats and to at least let our employees participate in the electronic world. There are days and weeks and sometimes months where we have to isolate a company 100% to make sure that nothing is stolen. That's one of the biggest. The cyber issue on industry is one of the real big issues we are dealing with, and this is really highly expensive because the attacks are real and not in theory, and we are more than warned, and we take care, and this absorbs a lot of money I would love to invest in our R&D activities.
Thank you, sir. Jan, if you can very quickly.
Thanks for this excellent question. It's a serious problem. The Czech government recently adopted not only a strategy to counter hybrid interference, and we count this kind of behavior as a hybrid interference, but we also adopted a law for screening of foreign investment. But I should also say that it's not only an issue for the critical infrastructure, but we should be also looking at startups and new companies that work in the emerging disruptive technology part of the market, because they are very vulnerable, perhaps even more than some of the critical infrastructure companies.
Excellent, thank you. I think we came to the end of the panel, and I would like to thank all our speakers. I think that there are perhaps three conclusions we can take away with us. Number one, from what we heard, is that indeed, both EU and NATO are developing their own, defense mechanisms, but there is not necessarily the need of duplication here. Just, there is a lot of complementarity here, and there is no need to think about, duplication indeed. And thank you for this session. We have heard some very interesting, take on relationship with China, and as well as pivot to Asia. And I think that this will be an increasing problem, the issue of property rights. This is a a question for defense industry, which increasingly will become troublesome, I guess. And finally, we had very interesting exchange on the procurement cooperation between two neighboring nations, but even within the Visegrad group. Obviously, we heard a very realistic assessment that there is a will, but when it comes down to the implementation, it can become very difficult. But it's very good that there is a will there. So with that, let me just conclude. Can I just ask everyone to thank our speakers?
Thank you.
Yeah.